Hey all, it's me, Amber. I just felt so compelled to share this experience I had yesterday and realized that's not really something that I could just fit into an intro. And it's been a while since I've done a full episode that's just me talking, and this is going to be rambling. And it's not one of those stories that ties itself up into a perfect bow at the end, as we've talked about before on the show, most recently with Tokopa. It's very rare that our lived stories are like the story arcs in the movies and books and stuff that we're used to. But this synchronous, serendipitous story, it's not just one story either, of course. There's just like so much to it. But I really felt like this is one to share. And so here I am in my workroom after getting Nixie down to sleep at 9 p.m. And I am usually in the bath getting ready for bed at this time. I almost never work after the kids are in bed. Sometimes I'll like read a work-related book in the bath or something, but it's just kind of a sanity rule I have for myself. But this is the only chance I'm going to have to record this story for like the next week. And so I've just got to do it now. And so the heart of the story is this experience I had yesterday afternoon that I'll get to. But there's just like all this complexity around it that I have to explain before we can get to why it was meaningful. So many of you know that my mama died in a car accident 3.5 years ago, almost now, November 27th, 2015. And when I started this podcast, I thought I would talk a lot more about it, and I still will, I think. I've always had the vision of telling the whole story in a podcast episode. So I will probably do that. Let me know if you'd like me to. It's on my blog too at mythicmedicine.love. But she was my best friend. She was my favorite person, my biggest supporter. She was just the most amazing, wonderful mother a person could ask for. The most amazing, wonderful person. Like, everyone loved her so much. She had so many friends. So many friends. She just radiated goodness and love. She was love. I was so lucky. So there's that piece to this story. And if you listen to the most recent episode with Asia Suler, or to the first time I interviewed Asia back in episode 4, I had this really incredible experience doing a guided meditation that Asia offers through her online course, Intuitive Plant Medicine. And she offered this very meditation to my Patreon supporters for this podcast. So if you would like to access it, you can check out patreon.com/medicine stories, $2 a month, and you can do this same meditation that I did. So even though I already told this story in episode 4, I'll recount it briefly. The meditation is called Finding Your Plant Ally, or Finding a Plant Ally. And when I laid down to do it in spring of 2017, 2 years ago, for some reason, I thought that I would connect with hawthorn. I would reconnect with hawthorn, this plant that I loved and had a deep connection with when I was first studying herbalism. Maybe because it was May and that plant was in flower at the time. I love those little white blossoms. So I'm going along doing the meditation, and there's like the moment where your plant appears or something like that. And all of a sudden, Angelica just truly like exploded like a firework into my inner visionary field. It was so unexpected, so out of nowhere, so powerful and beautiful. And I just immediately understood that it was connected to my mom. This plant and this plant coming to me in that way was connected to my mom. And I was just sobbing. Oh my God. Like huge, huge emotional release when that happened. So that summer, I was driving up to South Lake Tahoe, my hometown, where I was born from my mother's womb, where she raised me and my sister alongside our father. And I was thinking that Angelica grows up there because I had met this plant before in the High Sierra, but closer to here where I live now in the foothills of the Sierra and Grass Valley. And well, let me tell that story first. So that was during a class with Kathy Cavill, who's an amazing herbalist, who has a ton of books. You should check her out. I feel like not enough people know about Kathy. But we did a weekend camp out up in the High Sierra. And on the second day, we all went on this walk, just like deep into the woods together. And Kathy had us all separate out and go find a plant to sit with. And then after a while, we reconvened and we described the plant and talked about like what came to us when we were sitting with the plant. So I found this very tall, beautiful plant with these white flowers sticking up out of the top of it in like a big circle. Of course, this was Angelica. I didn't know that at the time, but if you haven't seen Angelica and you want to see what I'm talking about, you can Google it now. Just Google Angelica, Archangelica. That's not the species that grows in the Sierra, but it's the usual species that's used in medicine, and you can use any of them, any of the species. But you can just, they all look the same, more or less. They have the same form. And I was so struck by this plant. Like, how can this even be real? And I sat underneath it and had this sense of like divine mother and protection. And when we went back and described our plants and, talked about what we had experienced, another woman had also been sitting underneath Angelica, and she basically like had the exact same feelings or vision or sense of the plant that I did. And after listening to us, Kathy was like, yeah, that's Angelica, like that is what like Angelica is. And so I always remembered that experience, but for some reason in the ensuing years didn't really have many connections, interactions with Angelica until that vision doing Asia's meditation. And so then cut again to me driving up to Tahoe with my husband and two daughters. And I was like, yeah, I mean, Angelica must grow up here because we're in the High Sierra, right? And then as we're like approaching my hometown, I'm like, oh my gosh, there it is, and seeing it growing on the side of Highway 50 there, approaching Echo Summit, and I was so happy. And then like the next day I was driving Nixie to sleep when she was a teeny tiny baby and not wanting to nap in a strange place, strange home. And so I always go back to the neighborhood I grew up in when I'm in Tahoe. Always drive around a little bit, and if it's summertime, usually we'll walk around. And I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that I dream about my childhood home all the time, and just that whole neighborhood, when things were different back in the 80s, when you could just like roam and ride your bike all around, like far away from your house. So I kind of know this whole hillside that I grew up on very well, and I was driving a few roads up from my street. And this particular hillside was just covered in Angelica. And I was like, yes, this is, I'm going to come back later and spend some time with this plant. And so I did. And I was walking along that hillside and was really drawn to one plant, laid underneath it. So I was laying on my back with like the top of my head up against the bottom of the stem of this particular plant and looking up it to the bottom of the flower. And I just started talking out loud to my mom, just kind of, updating her on my life and her granddaughters. And, my little one, my oldest was 9 when she died, and my little one was conceived 3 weeks after she died. And it's still the craziest thing to me that they'll never meet each other. And so I was just telling her, all about Nixie and all about Mycelia and what her granddaughters are doing with their lives and how things are going with me and Owen and everything. I'm just telling her how much I love her and miss her and how hard it is not having her anymore. And just trying to explain. I don't know what grief is like, what it looks like for me. And it was really sweet. It was really sweet experience. And I went back later that fall and harvested some of the roots. And since that time have become very enamored of using the roots as a smoke medicine, lighting the dried root on fire and using that as my smoke medicine, as some people would use white sage. Of course, there's all the issues around that. I've been using mugwort for many years, and you can use all sorts of plants, like really any fragrant plant that's dried can be used, but I love using angelica. It is a whole nother level of scent, and for me, of causing a shift in consciousness that's really special, and that I've really come to associate with the ancestral realm since I've been using it that way. So yeah, what I want to do is go back to that same hillside and make a flower essence when the plant is in bloom. When I was there, when it was blooming that first time, when I laid beneath it and had the conversation with my mom and just, felt her there, felt so connected, felt her listening to me. It just didn't feel right to harvest the plant in any way at that moment. And of course, when I went back a few months later and harvested the roots, I did so very respectfully to not take very many of them so that the plants can continue to propagate and grow and spread and live and be themselves. So, but the flower essence is something that actually Asia makes. It's so interesting how all these threads weave themselves into in ways that you just don't know how they're gonna end up. Or so that's something else that I want to be talking about in this episode right now is that we'll get back to that with Marie Sue. So Asia makes an angelica flower essence, and I had got some from her a couple years ago when I was formulating our medicine, Rainbow Heart Beams, which is just all about opening the heart center, both physically and energetically. And, it's all tinctures, combination of tinctures and honey, but then I wanted to have an angelica flower essence in there too. And so I love that that's in there, because part of that medicine too is about grief and connection with the wider world and those who have passed on and the ancestors. And but I did not want to formulate a grief medicine that was to shut down your grief, to get you over it so you'll feel better, so I really specifically formulated it so that it just softens the heart area so that you can feel both the sadness and the grief and the happiness and the love and the joy more. And, putting that angelica flower essence in that medicine was definitely inspired by the vision I had of angelica during that meditation. So it's just such a cool plant. Of course, all plants have Roots, stems, leaves, flowers, seeds. Some have other parts. And there can be medicine in all of them. Some only have medicine in one part, some in two, three. It's just all different. But for me, I just see such an interesting, like, balance between the flowers and the root of Angelica. The stems tend to be pretty long. It can grow to be a really quite tall plant, and the stem is hollow, which Asia talks about in episode 4. And this is part of the mythology of this plant and why people all over the world, wherever it grows, have always associated this plant with like communication between the earth realm and the spirit realm, or the realm of the ancestors, or whatever that means to you. And part of that is because it has this hollow stem, and it's just like, its communication can go from down below to up above, unimpeded. So the flowers are this beautiful white umbels, so joyful, so beautiful. I'll put a photo that I took there in Tahoe on the post for this episode at mythicmedicine.love/podcast. And the lore around the flowers is this like communication with the spirit realm, basically. And this sort of like loving, joyful, almost always put in feminine terms. And I have really been aware of like not gendering plants in the last couple years, but I absolutely cannot divorce Angelica from a sense of the feminine. I mean, even the name Angelica, it's a name we give females in our culture. And it just so strongly feels like that, like to everyone who encounters it, or most people, at least. I can't speak for everyone. So there's this beautiful above ground part, truly joyful. I mean, these little white flowers are just like reaching out to the sun, reaching out to any human who they're going to fall in the visionary line of. And then you go down that hollow stem, and then there's the root that's in the earth. And it's this beautiful, brown, pungent, potent root. Like, the medicine of this root is so special. And you can taste it, or if you're burning it, you can smell it right away. Like, there's nothing like it, except for actually Osha is really, really similar to it. So there's nothing like them. And as Asia and I talked about, they're both considered bear medicine, because when bears emerge in the springtime, they seek out these roots. It is such strong medicine, and so invigorating, like life-giving is how I feel when I put these roots in my mouth. So when Seja Popham was on the podcast, I think that was episode 17, I shared a story about Osha root and having that in my mouth, and this huge grief, like waterfall that root opened up in me one day. So yeah, it's kind of funny that I just said there's nothing like Angelica when actually Osha is so similar to it. But like, I love that. I love that these plants have this incredible medicine. And, the flowers of Osha look similar to the flowers of Angelica. They're in the same family. They often grow near each other. And I really would use them interchangeably, except I'm thinking now that I hear a lot of, or have read a lot of stuff about Angelica root being really specific for women's reproductive stuff. And I don't remember ever reading that about Osha, but something to always keep in mind with plants and plant medicine is that these beings are so multidimensional. They have so many levels of medicine to offer us, and it's different from person to person too. Not everyone is going to have, actually, no one is going to have the same experience as anyone else. If you're really engaging with a plant, a whole plant, as medicine, you're going to have a unique experience. And that's why I think it's so important that we share these experiences. It's part of why I felt compelled to sit down here right now and speak this story out. because no one has had the exact experience I've had with Angelica, and yet many people will resonate with it and will feel drawn to it, and then will have their own experience and hopefully share it. And yes, 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 yes. So now I am feeling drawn to talk about my recent interview with Marie Sue, which will be coming out in a few episodes from now. Marie's music is what opens the podcast. It's really what like completely sets the tone and creates the container for what I'm trying to do with this show. And so much of what I'm trying to do is weave these stories, create circumstances where like synchronicities and serendipities can happen and people can recognize their own stories and their own selves and what they're hearing from other people. So Marie shared a couple stories of that happening to her while listening to this podcast. And then, very interestingly, what happened to me in the few days following my interview with Marie was something really similar. Like the things that Marie and I talked about coming all of a sudden being before me in my life. So I'll talk about some of those specifics. But first, I want to share something that Marie talked about. And again, you can hear this soon, like in a month or two, you'll hear this interview. Was she heard about a plant on this podcast, and it immediately just like barreled its way into her life, not even in physical form, but in spirit form. And something that we talked about was sometimes when you are receiving the medicine of a plant, it is just in the imaginal realm. It doesn't necessarily have to be the physical medicine of a plant that is healing you, that is bringing insight into your life. So Marie also talked about about an experience that she had on ayahuasca where she was just like ripped open with grief and couldn't stop crying in public. And that was ancestral grief and the grief of the spirits of the land that she was on. It's a beautiful story. I can't wait for you to hear it. And so the next day, I had 1 hour, and I really wanted to get the next podcast interview intro recorded during that hour so I could get that interview out. And it's not going to come out this week now as I wanted it to, because what happened instead was I spent 58 minutes of my one available hour on hold with the IRS, dealing with tax shit. And there is almost nothing I hate more in this world than stupid bureaucratic bullshit that takes up my time. Like, I find it so overwhelmingly frustrating and awful. And I was just in tears by the end of this hour, just like so overwhelmed by how hard it is to like eke out the time to ever get this podcast out, and how much I fucking hate taxes. And so then it was time for me to go to a Feldenkrais class. Feldenkrais is something I recently started getting bodywork sessions around and going to these classes. Very old man in my community who offers these, and I'm trying to get my pain under control and bring more awareness into how I'm holding and moving my body. So I went to this class right after that, and I walk in, and the class is all older women, mostly women in their 60s and 70s, and probably at least one in her 80s. And I walk in, and they're just all, it was just three of them when I got there, talking to each other and having a great time. And it was like the last couple times I've gone, like no one really acknowledged me or noticed me or talked to me. And I'm like, hey, you guys seem so awesome. Let's be friends. You know, I would just love to get to know you. but they all know each other. So they just kind of kept talking. And suddenly I was just like so sad that I wasn't being seen and that I don't have an older woman guiding me in my life anymore, like I had with my mom. Um, and so, this little kind of like, I don't know, ego feeling of no one's paying attention to me, like very quickly turned into just this huge grief over not having my mom anymore. And I spent the whole class crying, like hard, but silently, because I didn't want to interrupt what was going on. But also not totally silently, like it's just that these people are old and maybe not hearing as well as they were when they were younger, so no one noticed. And like I both did and did not want to be noticed. I really didn't want to disrupt anything. I would have felt super awkward if everything had to stop because I like had a hard time with my taxes and I miss my mom. But I also really would have loved someone to just like hug me, and like care what was going on. And it just really brought up how like my mom was just my biggest supporter. Like, as much as I have people in my life who really love me a lot and care about me, no one will ever understand me or support me the way she did. And so even if I did connect with like this older female figure who I'm craving, it would never be like that. So it was like what Marie had shared. I had this like huge grief release. And when we were talking about it the day before too, I was thinking like, wow, I haven't had one of those in a long time. I've had some for sure, but I haven't had like something like that happen in a long time. And then boom, it happened the next day. And so I think now that this is bringing me to what happened yesterday, to my experience yesterday. So overall, last week, I'm recording this Sunday evening, was just terrible. It was like the worst week. And like, I don't even believe in bad days because, it's like you have your hard part of the day, but then there's always a good part, or there's something to be grateful for, or there's some connection you can have with someone somewhere. But I had some truly awful days. And was super stressed and overwhelmed. And my pain pattern was super activated because on Monday, Nixie and I ran around downtown Grass Valley together. I had a super heavy bag like you do when you're a mom over my shoulder with snacks and change of clothes and our water. And we ended up walking to the library, so then I had some books weighing me down, and I'm like trying to keep her from running into traffic, running out the cafe door when I'm not even done eating my food. And anyway, at the end of the day, I was like, oh my God, like my pain pattern is so activated right now. And this is why I'm trying to bring the awareness piece in too, because I didn't even notice when it happened, but I'm pretty sure it was at some point during the like 3 hours we were in town. And it was fun. I had such a good time being with her. But my pain got really activated and I was really out and just really in pain all week. And then again, like trying so hard to get the next podcast interview out. And every time I had a moment to do it, it was like, oh, you got to take care of these taxes. Oh, here's an email from the school and something else you need to do. I mean, just life, especially, kids and running a business. And life, we all experience this. Feeling like I'm just like clawing my way into ever getting anything done that is meaningful to me or meaningful to other people past all the bullshit. And then this huge grief thing coming up with my mom. And then that same day, my husband's father had a small stroke. And we adore him. He's amazing and wonderful. And so it brought up, all this stuff for my husband. It was just really sad. And so that's the kind of week I'm coming off of yesterday on Saturday. when I get an Instagram message from a friend who lives in Washington State, and hi Jasmine, and is like, hey, don't you live in Nevada City? Like, we're coming through there today. And I was like, oh my God, yes, I would love to see you. We met on Instagram when we were pregnant, 3 years ago now, I guess, when we were pregnant. And our girls were just born a couple weeks apart. She now has a baby girl too. And just like have always loved watching her family on Instagram. And her oldest daughter is 2.5, like Nixie. And we always thought that they would be such buddies. And so they were going to come over. And I was like, yes, this is going to be awesome. But the house was such a mess. And this is another thing that really adds to my stress is just like, I don't need a perfectly clean house. I really, really don't. I don't even feel comfortable in perfectly clean houses, honestly. But sometimes the amount of clutter and messiness living with a 2-year-old, and then also just feeling like I never have enough time to do anything. Like there's so many moments in the week where I'm like, okay, so I could clean this and organize my paperwork, or I could go get a podcast episode out, or do an Instagram post, or go swimming at the gym, or take my oldest out for ice cream. It's just a million other things that I would rather do and that also need to be done just as much as the cleaning needs to be done. But like yesterday morning, I was just like panicked by the state of the house. And so all of a sudden, people who've never been over coming over was like the perfect motivation I needed to just really, really, really start cleaning. But I was in so much pain also that I just was like, oh, this, like, I'm going to hurt even worse doing this, because it's like bending forward. That makes it so much worse when my pain pattern is activated. And I was like, well, you know what? Like, smoking weed actually almost always helps me clean. It's like I love cleaning when I smoke weed, which I almost never do, by the way. I smoked like a month ago. My husband and I did, and I couldn't even remember the last time I did at that point. But I was like, this is just the perfect time to smoke a little weed, So Owen rolled a joint, and it's so funny now to talk about this like in public. I'm like, it's totally legal here in California. Like, I can admit in public that I smoked a joint. I had one hit because I know if I have any more than that, I'll be paranoid and weird. Had one hit. He was strolling Nixie around the neighborhood while she had her nap, and it was perfect because I was motivated to like really clean and enjoying the cleaning process and like making my little spaces and all that stuff. And as I was walking around the house, I was just really like thinking about alone, which I'm never alone in my home ever. This is just like freedom. Just thinking about my mom and how us having this house is so tied into her death because of money I inherited, because we sold her house when she died, and my sister and I split what we got, and I was able to put a down payment down. I never, ever thought I would be a homeowner. I still can't believe it. But just so many other ways that this house feels like a gift from her. As I spoke about in the interview with Atava, and she had a similar experience with her father's death. Like, I lost my person, but I gained so many blessings as a result of her death. I don't know. I still can't make sense of it. I think about it all the time, but I still can't make sense of it. But walking around the house, and I was just like letting go of all the anxiety and tension I feel when it's messy, and instead just feeling so grateful, so grateful. I fucking own a home that I love living in on an incredible acre of land where we can grow amazing medicine. And it just like supports me. See, here's that support that I was so feeling I was lacking. So walking around the house, cleaning, and then like at peak stoneness, I sat down on the couch and just felt this like, whoosh, I don't know, just this feeling come over me, and I just started talking out loud to my mom. And as I was doing that, I had this like vision, this sense of sort of a white light coming out of the top of my head and like connecting upward. And I was talking to her and like sensing, seeing, feeling this white light coming out of me. And it suddenly hit me like, oh, Angelica. Like, this is the spirit of Angelica here with us, being a bridge of communication. I'm shaking between me and her, and this is always available to me. And like, I don't utilize it when I'm so stressed out and caught up in my story of all the shit I have to do and what's not working and what's going wrong and I'm in pain. And oh, it was like just one of those moments. It's like just a revelation that hits the heart and like tears you open in the sweetest way. And I hadn't, you just heard me talk a lot about Angelica. It might sound like it's constantly on my mind or in my life, but I hadn't thought about it in a while, or hadn't been using the medicine or just engaging with the spirit of the plant in a while. And it was like that. It's like a sweet moment when you see a good friend again, when I made the connection that like and the Angelica was like holding my space around me and creating a container where this communication can happen. And it made me feel so happy to remember that I can still talk to her, because I don't even know if I've done it since the time that I was laying under the Angelica plant that day. I think every now and then I'll be like, I love you, Mom. I miss you, Mama. I wish you could see your granddaughters. But not like a long, sustained soliloquy where I'm just really like pouring out my heart to her like I used to do all the time when she was alive. And just realizing that like I could do that. And I can see how our relationship evolves when I am keeping the communication going from my end. And I think that one of the things that's prevented me from doing that, and I think a lot of you who have lost someone will understand, is that like grief is scary. And sometimes I just don't even want to think about her too deeply, because I'm afraid it'll hurt too much. Because it will. Not always, though. That's one of the interesting things about grief, is that about losing someone, is that like sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it really is okay. And then sometimes it's just absolutely not. And I'm feeling like I was in that class the other day, or I've had other really, really big like deluges of grief, and it's almost scary, and I think that like we avoid going that deeply into it. This is another thing we've talked about a lot on this podcast. Another time that this happened to me, like one of the reasons I feel scared was this happened at Spirit Weavers in 2016, the Spirit Weavers gathering. So it wasn't even a year since my mom had died, and I was pregnant. I entered my third trimester while I was there. And on the last day of that gathering, I haven't been in a couple years, but that was my third year in a row. There's like this closing ceremony, and it's really beautiful and really powerful. And it's hard to describe. They do something similar at the Northern California Women's Herbal Symposium, but like all the women are together in a big outdoor space, and you sing this song over and over and like really connect like eye to eye, heart to heart with most of the women who are there. And it's really powerful and emotional. There's a lot of tears. And because I had done it before and I knew how powerful and emotional it was, and I decided not to do it. that year, because I don't even know if I consciously thought this, but I was afraid that it would like break me open too much since my mom had just died like 7 or 8 months before. But I watched it. I watched it from this building nearby. Um, and I was like up on the deck on the second story, and it was like beautiful. And I was like smiling, watching all these women having this beautiful experience. I was like, it's so great. It's so nice. And then all of a sudden, I fucking lost it and started sobbing so, so, so hard. I didn't even need to be a part of this ritual to have its emotional effects impact me. And I went downstairs. There was a little tea room. There was no one in it because everyone was doing the ritual, you know, and I was just crying so, 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 so hard. And then this woman and her baby came in, and she really gave me a lot of love. And it was Katya. I didn't know her at the time, but we connected later on Instagram. Katya from Nurturing Nova. You know, she has a lot of Instagram followers, and she has a podcast too, so I'm sure some of you know her. But it was so sweet and so nice to just be seen and held and witnessed by someone there. Thank you, Katya. But I couldn't stop it. It wouldn't stop. You know, this, like, the faucet had been opened, and I was just going and going and crying and sobbing and so fucking sad. So sad. My mom's gone. And that it happened the way it did, you know, car accident, like, just the suddenness and the shock, and like she got hurt, you know. I mean, it's not really hurt because she died instantly, but I just hate that she was hurt. Yeah, it's just kind of like, I can't go here all the time, you know. I can't go here all the time, or I wouldn't be able to live my life. So the ceremony was ending, and I was like still crying so hard, and I walked out of that room, and actually 2 previous podcast guests saw me and came to me and held me and loved me, and that was Mila and Yaya and my friend Tysa as well. And it was lovely, but I still couldn't stop, you know, even though the energy of like the whole place and the whole gathering had changed, because the ceremony was over and people were breaking up and going back to their tents or leaving or whatever. Like, I was still just totally lost in this grief and couldn't stop crying. And finally I was like, this isn't good anymore. This doesn't feel good. And I'm a big believer in like letting yourself cry and getting your grief out, and, you know, going back to formulating the heart medicine. I didn't want to try to make something that was like, this will shut your grief down. But at this point I was like an hour and a half, 2 hours into this, and I don't even think I experienced like an outpour like that in the first few weeks or months after my mom died. One that was like that sustained and that overwhelming. So finally I went into the wellness center where they have all these herbal remedies, and was just like, please give me something. You know, I just explained like, it's too much. I can't keep crying. And I think they just gave me some nervines like chamomile, lemon balm. You know, they knew I was an herbalist, so they gave me some options, and I chose what sounded good. And it helped. It did help. And, you know, so not wanting to go there, I think, is why and I'm sure so many other people, kind of shut ourselves off from just the simple act of like talking to our beloved dead, talking to our ancestors, if it is an ancestor of your lineage who's your beloved dead, or, you know, keeping the line of communication open in whatever way feels feels right for you. But something I have found is so powerful is just talking. I started using this hashtag years ago before my mom died. Talk to your ancestors. Like, it's that simple. This is something that I teach when I am talking about ancestral connection, is just speak out loud to them. Speak the names of the ones you know. Just talk about what's going on with you. You can talk about the relationship you had with them, if it was someone you knew, your memories of them, what you're grateful for. Talk to your ancestors. And here I am not talking to my mother, and sitting there on the couch with the Angelica surrounding me and reminding me. I just felt so grateful that that is always there. I can always just talk to her to reclaim our relationship. It's going to be different now. She's not embodied, she's not in physical form, but the relationship is still there. The relationship remains, the love remains. And I just need to keep talking to her. And I'm excited now. I'm excited to see like what comes of it, how I change, how I shift, how my grief shifts. And to me, it's a huge reminder that I am supported still. I'm supported by her, wherever she is, whatever form she's in now. I'm supported by Angelica and my other plant allies. And I know I'm supported in real life by real people too. And it was just such a sweet reminder of that. And so as that like vision is kind of winding down, I'm like, oh, I gotta find my Angelica flower essence, or like, what Angelica medicine do I have in the house? And then I remembered what Marie talked about and how we can just work with a plant spirit. We don't always have to work with the physical medicine of it. And so I was like, yeah, I feel like that's all I need right now. It's just the presence of this plant that I have cultivated a relationship with and had meaningful connection with in the past, right here with me. And so then I got up and continued cleaning, and it was funny too, though, when I was thinking about like, okay, where's my Angelica flower essence from Asia? And I know I have more Angelica medicine in the house. Where is it? What is it? I had this sense like there's something I'm forgetting. And as I'm walking in the kitchen, boom, right there in the corner on the counter is a basket full of Angelica roots that had been there for a few weeks. That was from Angelica plants that my husband Owen grew last year, that he grew for me. It's funny because I didn't even know this until he did an Instagram post about it, but he said that he planted Angelica in our garden, like, so that I would see it and be happy every time I walked into the garden. Oh, I love you, Owen. Thank you. Thank you for supporting me too. Being my main support now that my mom's gone. And so there they were. I was like, oh my God, it's like right here, boom, right here. I have this vision with the white light, very similar to the white flowers and like that aspect of Angelica, the flowering upper parts of the plant. And then I walk into my kitchen and there in like the dark corner is the roots of the plant. And so even though I had just had this like realization, remembrance that I don't have to work at the physical medicine of the plant, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, yes, Angelica root, you are going into my mouth. And so I just, picked off a little dried piece of the root, put it in my mouth. And oh my gosh, it's familiar to me from eating osha over the years. And immediately I felt it like reset my body and the pain pattern. And I'm not saying that I was like immediately healed and felt better everywhere, because that wasn't it. But what I did feel it like truly move is my tailbone and my pelvic floor, my root, right? The root of my body, which my pain is mostly in like my head, neck, shoulder on the right side. But of course, everything's connected. And I'd been vaguely aware during the super stressful week of my pelvic floor and like tailbone and sacrum and everything feeling off. But as soon as I ate that angelica root, it was like whoosh, boom, goes down to my root, makes me more aware of it, and helps me to feel how I can balance it. Like stand differently, hold myself differently when I'm standing and when I'm walking. So I just kind of did a few laps around the house, noticing how I was walking, noticing like the tension that I hold in that area of my body. I'm sure we all do, especially women. And just feeling like this full, like I was having this full medicine experience, right? The flowers, the spirit, my spirit self, my emotional self, and then boom with a root down into my physical body in such a strong way. And and yeah, I also, feel the need to like mention cannabis here for being this incredible, it's another bridge plant. Um, I mean, yeah, it's not a plant that I ever talk much about or use much these days, like I said, and it's nothing I've ever really abused either. A lot of people really abuse cannabis, as I'm sure you know, but I've always sensed its power for me and used it in a way that's like when I can go deep within. In college, I used to, in the dark, pitch black, I wouldn't even light a candle in my room. I would get stoned, get on my yoga mat, and listen to Bjork's album Medulla, which is like a super go deep within album. I don't like smoking weed with people at all. And I really just like being alone, maybe with my husband, because we can just kind of snuggle up and have fun. But really, and then just not using it very often for me means that every time I do use it, I have some sort of like very meaningful insight, like I did yesterday with this Angelica. Um, like connections get made. Connections get made. Stress falls away. My body relaxes, and then all these new connections can be made. Threads can find their way to one another and be like, oh, yes, this makes sense. Oh, this is what we've been trying to work out this whole time, but couldn't get like the busy mind out of the way. A lot of creative insight. So, yeah, just want to acknowledge that too. Thank you, cannabis. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Asia. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much, Mom. I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for myself, for the me that you made me, for the bloodline that you passed down to me, for the love that you gave me that allows me to give my own daughters that same love and to hopefully be a bridge to other humans in the world. Of love, a bridge of love. And that's not making much sense to me, but a bridge between like this universal love that you channeled, that I feel Angelica channels through me, from that to the world, to the podcast listeners, to everyone I come in contact with in my daily life, to my family. Like, what else is there? What else is there but love? Again, going back to the conversation with Atava and other people that we've had. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. It is now almost 10 p.m., which is absolutely when I need to be asleep. You guys are the best. Thank you. I love you. Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, past podcast episodes, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, I invite you to click the purple banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Healing Herb is Your Plant Familiar? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some killer rewards there, exclusive content, access to online courses, free, beautiful, downloadable ebooks, coupon codes, giveaways, and just amazing gifts provided by past guests of the podcast. All of that stuff is at the $2 a month level. For a little more, you can access my herbal ebook or my small online course. And that's all there as a thank you, a huge thank you from me and from my guests for listening, for supporting this work. I love figuring out what I can give to people on Patreon. It's so fun. And I love that Patreon makes it that you can contribute for such a small amount a month. I'm a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding this project into my life has been a questionable move for sure. But I love doing it, and I love the feedback that I get from you all. And I just pray that the Patreon continues to allow me the financial wiggle room to keep on doing it while giving back to everyone who's listening. If you're unable to do that, or if you'd like to support further, I would love it if you would subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you would review the podcast on iTunes too, really helps get it into other ears. And it means so much to me when I read those reviews. It's like the highlight of my week when I check them and see new ones. And people are amazing. You guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. The music that opens and closes the show is by Marie Sioux, Marieesioux. It's from her song Wild Eyes, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. Thank you so much, and I look forward to next time.